Hello, I'm Sean Lay. Welcome to the programme which brings together BBC specialists and the foreign correspondents who file their stories for audiences back home. Dateline London. This week, Boris Johnson boasts of vaccine success. His government says 2 jabs will be followed by a COVID booster in the autumn, as Europeans struggle with too many infections and too few doses of vaccine. A rare misstep by Angela Merkel. Have Germans and others had enough of lockdown and the evergreen traffic jam that risked withering global trade? With me this weekend, Ashish Ray from India is approaching 45 years as a foreign correspondent, as well as serving at the crease as a cricket commentator. Stephanie Bolson is UK and Ireland correspondent for Germany's Welt. And with me here, Clive Myrie, who reports internationally for the BBC, as well as presenting the news back home. Now, the reason we have the vaccine success Prime Minister Boris Johnson is reported to have told his MPs this week is because of capitalism, because of greed. Whether he was joking or saying what he thinks in an unguarded moment during a private meeting, it's perhaps more accurate to say that globalisation, which helped COVID's rapid spread, is critical to vaccination success. This weekend, UK government ministers predicted a booster jab by September, but India has halted exports and Europe is threatening to. Stephanie Bolson, let's talk first of all about what's happening. EU leaders agreed their position Thursday on all of this. They're pretty troubled by what's been happening. They singled out the UK in particular. What's their beef, and what are the changes that are likely to follow for this? Do you think they're going to follow through on the threat to impose some kind of export restriction?
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting question. And for now, this has all been only threats. And interestingly, there are reports in the UK and also back in Europe that right now there are talks going on between the British government and the European Commission to find an agreement after what has been a very tumultuous week, where the European Commission actually made their possibilities to stop exporting vaccines produced in Europe to the UK and to other parts of the world even more likely, and stronger measures that they can take. So they said in the future, the European Commission will look at proportionality. So how many vaccines does another country actually have that is receiving vaccines from Europe? And also reciprocity. So if, for example, AstraZeneca is produced in the UK, there should be also coming vaccines to Europe. And the Commission released numbers, and the numbers are quite staggering in the way that actually half of what is produced in the European Union goes outside the European Union. And with the slow rollout back in Europe, this is certainly a problem for the politicians in Europe.
77 million doses, I think the Commission was saying, have gone to high or middle income countries, 30 million of them to the UK, and the UK has exported to the EU none.
Well, yeah, this is at least, I mean, we don't know because there haven't been any numbers officially released by the British government. But of course, it's all about reciprocity. And you just talked about the British government now already, and that's a wonderful thing, talking about a third vaccine, a booster vaccine. But of course, they need the supplies. And you might say, well, in Britain, for example, parts of the BioNTech vaccine are produced in Yorkshire. So if the Europeans stop, then the British will also stop. But there is complete interdependence. So if the British are not delivering anymore, BioNTech in Belgium can't produce, and then BioNTech will not come anymore to the UK. So the dependence is enormous, and the pressure on everybody is really, really feasible, especially in my country, in Germany, which has seen a rather tumultuous week, but I think we're going to talk about that anyway.
Oh, yeah, we've got plenty more to talk about on this, haven't we? Ashish, let's kind of make the connection from Europe to India here, because part of the doses that the British government was expecting to get from AstraZeneca are actually manufactured with the Serum Institute in India. Tell us a bit about the institute and also what the implications are of this, the problems they're experiencing in sourcing some of the elements of that from the United States.
Well, first of all, the Serum Institute is the world's biggest manufacturer of vaccines. And they have been very much at the forefront of supplies, not only within India, but also exporting to other countries by virtue of the Indian government's insistence that it does so. And over and above, it has a commitment of 550 million doses to COVAX, which is run by the World Health Organization. Now, having said that, there is an obligation, it appears, between Serum Institute and AstraZeneca for Serum Institute to supply to AstraZeneca as and when required, because they are both manufacturing the same Oxford vaccine. And so as a result of this, AstraZeneca asked for 5 million doses to be sent to the UK. And in that situation, the difficulty that arose was this, that there was no problem until a few weeks ago when Narendra Modi was merrily exporting to other countries to the extent that India was exporting more than it had made available to its own people. And this came under severe criticism in the Indian Parliament from Indian opposition members of Parliament. And also, all of a sudden, there is now what's being called a second wave in India. In fact, in the past 24 hours, more than 62,000 new cases have been detected. And that being the case, the Indian government has now clamped down and told all Indian companies, including Serum Institute, that you cannot export any more until further notice. So this is the difficulty. At this present point of time, Serum Institute has applied to the Indian government for a license to fulfill this obligation of 5 million to the UK, to AstraZeneca. And my best guess is that we will see a slight delay in that export, but it will happen in due course. It will not happen immediately, but it will happen in due course as the two governments, that is the government of the United Kingdom and the Indian government, sort this matter out.
Clearly will, because Boris Johnson is due to celebrate India's important national day very shortly, isn't he? We'll be talking about that hopefully on Dateline in the coming weeks. Clive, I mean, it's an interesting connection between India and the UK. Here's another one. The Serum Institute says it relies in part for some key materials on, I think, bioreactor filters and bags. I'm not a scientist, I don't quite know what that means, but that's what they're saying. And they come from the United States, and guess what? The United States has imposed export restrictions under its Defence Protection Act. No wonder Boris Johnson was sounding so emollient about the EU. Normally he'd be up in arms.
Yeah, I mean, look, what you're seeing here is basic commerce being broken on the wheel of national priorities. So agreements were made between the pharmaceutical companies and the European Union in order to produce certain stocks of vaccines. Those agreements were also made with other countries. As a result, you've got stocks being made in Europe that are being sent all over the world because of those agreements. India makes contracts with some of these companies, vaccine companies, and as a result, stocks are leaving India because of commerce and those deals that are made. But India's seeing a rise in its infection rate, so as a result, that kicks in. Joe Biden, he inherits a particularly appalling vaccine rollout from the Trump administration. He says, I'm going to invoke the Defence Protection Act, which means that I can take control of the supplies of certain components in the supply chain. That forces Moderna and Pfizer to say, OK, we'll increase our dosage numbers to you to 300 million each by the end of the year, which means that you can vaccinate everybody. So you're seeing commerce to essentially undercut Boris Johnson's claim that it's all about, capitalism and greed. You're seeing commerce being completely wiped away by national priorities. And the fact is, variants can spread. We're in a globalized world, and as a result, we've got to work together. Nationalism will not solve this, but that's where we are.
Yeah, no, it is where we are at the moment. And as you say, meanwhile, Ashish was referring to COVAX there, of course, the effort to try and vaccinate all those parts of the world, the poorer income countries, which right now must wonder, what on earth are these people talking about boosters? We haven't even got vaccine doses yet. Now, my mistake. German Chancellor Angela Merkel told a news conference Wednesday after she scrapped a 5-day Easter lockdown just 48 hours after it was announced. A third wave of infection is stalking Europeans, including Germans, as Stephanie was saying. But protests against lockdown are being experienced both on the continent and in the UK. Here, many have bridled at the idea floated by Mr Johnson of having to show proof of vaccination, even to visit the pub. Ashish, in terms of the prospects of this over time, it looks as if pandemic virus will eventually become endemic. Have we had enough of a debate yet about what the implications of that are for personal freedom against the desire to protect?
In fact, it seems to me we are in a firefighting situation. You douse the fire at one point and a fire arises in another. And although I have said this before, that last year, I think there was total bungling by the British government, and as a result of which 3 waves of the disease have occurred and more people than necessary have died. But the vaccination has gone very well in Britain. And I think there's room for conservatism with a small c in this situation, rather than be aggressive and ambitious and think in terms of opening up businesses, because we could have another wave of the infection if that aggressive approach is adopted. So I'm very much with the British government on this. I believe the opposition parties are with the government on this as well. And so there is certainly, there's room for people being cautious rather than much too aggressive.
Stephanie, we heard this question of the Angela Merkel apology. How much of this do you think this kind of reversal of policy in a matter of hours, or a couple of days, was down to a sense that Germans have kind of had enough of the restrictions which they've been labouring under pretty much for the whole of the last year?
Yeah, definitely. Germans have had enough, but that is certainly not a phenomena only restricted to Germany. All over Europe, people are very angry, frustrated, mainly because the vaccine rollout is so slow. So if you look at the UK, more or less has 4 times more vaccines given per adult person than the EU average. So someone yesterday on the phone from Germany said to me, look, compliance is a good thing and people do comply, but if there's something to look forward to. So here in the UK, the vaccine rollout goes really well, and you have the dates that lockdown will be restricted, while on the continent, it goes the other way. And lockdowns are now really introduced again. So, for example, Poland just now has gone back into a lockdown for 3 weeks. In Belgium, restrictions are coming in again. There are now a stop of traffic between France and Germany. So from Sunday night on, you have to show a negative test if you want to travel from France into Germany. And that's why people are getting very impatient, and they're getting angry because nothing is really improving. Of course, Angela Merkel's asking for forgiveness the other day was also in the context of a German election looming. So in September, there's a federal election. And just now this week, the CDU, her party, had the biggest drop on record in the polls. So on top of the very tense situation because of Corona in Germany, there's also a very increasingly tense situation because of the looming elections.
Ashish, how much of all of this, because it is a global problem, we've seen resistance in the United States, we see ongoing protests in Brazil. There are lots of countries where people have kind of resisted restrictions on freedom and liberty. It's been done in the interest, in the name of public health, but there are in some countries, there always a suspicion that it's being done also for political convenience or administrative convenience, or because there are some countries, some governments in parts of the world that where their instinct is to restrict, not to liberate.
Indeed, that's absolutely true. I think by and large in the developing world, I would say that it's easier to impose restrictions because governments tend to be autocratic. In India, for instance, the imposition of lockdowns have been somewhat haphazard. It has been temperamental. For instance, the one that took place in March of last year was ordered within 4 hours. So the matter did not go through Parliament at all when it came into force. And it continued again in a somewhat unscientific manner before it was lifted. And then there was this situation about a month and a half ago when the Indian government was proclaiming that freedom has been achieved, but it wasn't the case. And we have this situation of an alarming rise now in India of cases, and doctors are predicting that this second wave in India could be worse than the first wave. Yes, but in a liberal democracy like Western democracies, and in Britain included, I would say that it's less easy, because there will be contentious issues, challenges will take place. You mentioned the matter of a vaccine card to enter pubs. Well, if you allow people who have got, let's say, 2 doses of the vaccine to enter a pub, and you don't allow others who may or may not have been offered 2 doses and or may not qualify. The younger generation, for instance, wanting to go to a pub may not have got to the stage of vaccination, then that would certainly amount to discrimination. But I would venture to say that this is not that much of a problem in developing countries. Sadly so, it should be so. But I think it's something that the world will have to grapple with, because this problem, this coronavirus, does not seem to be going away in a hurry. And so it could be a pretty long haul, and the world would have to adjust to living with it rather than wishing it away.
Clive, do you think that the kind of this question of how we're going to kind of persuade people rather than just instruct people? I mean, the British government renewed its emergency plans for a further 6 months, but under considerable discomfort and disquiet, even from its own backbenchers. Even those who voted for it weren't particularly happy about the prospect. I mean, something will have to change, won't it, in how we handle it?
But you see, what's interesting about the situation here in the UK is that the opposition is primarily coming from the Prime Minister's own backbenchers. It's not coming from the British people. The polls are pretty consistent here, that the British people believe it's a price that has to be paid. But the voices on the backbenches are loud. They're a minority, but they're loud. And Boris Johnson has to be mindful of that, even though he does have an 80-seat majority. I think that's the key thing for him. The fact that the vaccine rollout has been successful. He's seeing his stock rise in the polls with the British people. He's got a lot of room where he can say, look, I am taking the decision that if we need to lock down a little bit longer, then it's going to have to be done. And someone like Chris Whitty, who's the chief medical officer for England, you know, the chief guy giving him his scientific advice, I suppose you could say, he is very cautious. He's worried about winter coming, the pressures on the National Health Service. He's worried about variants on the continent. And the longer that this vaccine is out there, the more chance there is for mutations. So he's talking about the possibility of still having restrictions, Chris Whitty, this time, you know, come Christmas time. So you've got this sort of good cop, bad cop sort of thing with Boris Johnson. But Boris Johnson clearly has room for manoeuvre, because at the moment, the British people are behind him. He doesn't have to listen to those siren voices in his backbenches.
Now, it's almost as long as New York's Empire State Building is high, and it spent most of the week blocking Egypt's Suez Canal. The Evergreen, stranded in a sandstorm, caused an almighty traffic jam. The alternative? Take the pre-1880s route for freight going around Africa. Even with 21st century ships, that's quite a diversion. Up to 3 weeks. Actually, there's something kind of almost funny about the idea, despite all the logistics, all the modern technology, that the combination of a bit of bad weather, a really bad sandstorm, and a troublesome 3-point turn can jam one of the most important waterways in the world. But in a sense, it's potentially a lot more serious, isn't it? Not just because of the economic costs, but because of the strategic significance of this canal.
Absolutely. It seems amusing for a moment, but at the moment, it's really becoming more serious. I do believe that it's a problem which is, again, going to take a few days before it's resolved. $9 billion worth of goods pass through the Suez Canal every day. So that's a huge proportion. And countries are having to divert ships to around the Cape of Good Hope until this matter has been sorted out. And it is indeed a problem. So this is accumulating. Countries like India, for instance, export to Europe, North America, South America via the Suez Canal and the other way around. The American continent and the European continent, they supply goods not just to India, but beyond through the Suez Canal. So that is certainly a problem. It's a critical state of affairs. It makes matters more expensive for the simple reason that the ships have to take a longer route and there will be delays in deliveries because of the fact that it's a longer journey. So everything put together, I think it is a bit of a crisis at the moment, and it seems the owners of the ships have apologized, and they are saying that they're trying their best, but there is no immediate resolution. It will take possibly a few weeks to work it out.
Stephanie, a lot of the history of Europe's historical success, the rise of the great empires, was dependent on these sea routes and these new routes east and getting goods from the developing world, parts of the old empire, to the consumers in Europe. I mean, there are new possibilities, aren't there? We always used to talk about the Northwest Passage until the beginning of the 20th century. They finally managed it, but the ice always did for that. And now the ice is melting around the Arctic, and suddenly you've got all these countries jostling under the guise of scientific expedition for access to these new routes. I mean, it's still an important part of the way we connect.
Yes, it is. And of course, the numbers are so impressive. I think it was reported that every hour that this ship is stuck in the Suez Canal, it's something like 338 million euro damage to the world economy. And it also reminded me, I think it was in 2019, where there were the tensions around once more around the Strait of Hormuz, and how dependent the world is and how dependent you are of some waterways and some sea passages. But to be honest, I just thought suddenly somehow it reflects also what it means when things come to a halt. So suddenly everything stops, like the lockdown we are in now. And we are now exactly a year after that the first lockdown started here in Europe. And it made me think of what comes afterwards and how much reflection there has now been going on. And also the question of what comes afterwards. Is capitalism really working yet? And there are so many fascinating books coming out. The future of capitalism, what comes after growth? Is GDP really the right measurement to measure our being and our present and our future especially? So it actually made me think more about the rather philosophical, broader context we are currently in and what it all means for us, whether the ship is stuck or whether we are stuck at home.
Are we all going to end up like the kind of Marie Celeste floating in the middle, and everybody wonders whatever happened to us? Now, I tell you what, one thing we've brought many people together during lockdown, virtually at least, were quizzes. So let's end on a question. Which long-running television quiz show was inspired by wartime interrogation, is introduced with a music track called Approaching Menace, and has just appointed its latest presenter? It's Mastermind. Now, you may know it even if you're not watching in the UK. There are versions in India, Israel, Kazakhstan, Russia and Turkey, as well as in other countries in English. The man who knows all about it is the new host of Mastermind. Congratulations, Clive. Have you been practicing your interrogation technique in the mirror at home?
I have, yes. Dim the lights, just have the one sort of bulb hanging in the middle, and focus the attention on the unwilling suspect. Yes, it's something I'm looking forward to, and it's interesting that the franchise has gone all over the world, and there seems to be a penchant for people to see others squirm potentially, and try to sort of air their knowledge when it comes to answering questions on their specialist subject. It's been going since 1972, first time it was put out there, and as you say, Bill Wright, the guy who produced the whole thing when it started in the 70s, he was a prisoner of war, shot down over Germany, and he was interrogated and he was asked your name, your rank and your number, and that's where the opening lines come from for the questioning. So yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
I raised this question, Ashish. They do a celebrity edition. You and Stephanie could end up on these at some point. If you did, Ashish, what would be your chosen specialised subject?
Well, my wife thinks it should be Indian cricket, and I agree with her.
2 minutes on Indian cricket. Sadly, we're almost out of time. We don't have enough time to do that. Stephanie, what would be yours?
A very special one. European football matches between Borussia Mönchengladbach and Manchester City in 1978 and 1979.
I don't know if you can even get 2 minutes out of that, but I'm sure somebody could try. Clive, you are safe from never having to answer these questions.
Thankfully, yes.
Because you can't ask yourself the questions, although many presenters like to ask themselves the questions. We'll leave that one for another day. What would it have been if you'd been a guest facing Clive Myrie or any other presenter?
Vaccine supply chains. No question about it. I am an expert. Aren't we all?
Clive Myrie, many congratulations. He didn't know that was coming, and he's taken it on the chin. God bless you, sir. Congratulations from all of us. Stephanie, Ashish, and to you, thank you very much for joining Dateline London for this week. I'll be back at the same time. See you then. Goodbye.